Hi all, let's look at another fascinating game from the GRENKE chess classic. Arkadij Naiditsch, excuse the pronunciation, was playing against Magnus Carlsen. So this is in round 7. E4. We have Magnus playing the Sicilian defence, so a very fighting choice of chess opening. Knight f3 d6, and we actually go into the Naiditsch variation, mainline Naiditsch, until here white chooses g3. There are plenty of moves in Chess-Based Livebook which are preferred, like bishop e3, bishop g5, and the list goes on, bishop e2, bishop c4, f4, h3, f3, a4. But yeah, g3's around about there after all that lot, g3. It seems a natural move, though, to sort of keep a bind on the d5 square. We see e5, knight b3, bishop e7. You can see that black voluntarily accepts the backward pawn. Is that so dreaded here? It's also on a semi-open file. Black also has a semi-open file, but this pawn might be protectable later. That's the difference. This is, by being backward, it's usually, in theory, it's a target. In practice, often black is getting sufficient counterplay, which is why this is such a popular variation. So we see bishop g2, black castles, white castles, bishop e6. The blockade square is of interest as well, but to sort of suffocate, especially this bishop, to try and lock down this bishop in its own pawn chain to keep it a prisoner. So I believe that's one of the positional ideas here, just to keep a lock and key over the d5 square. Rook e1, knight bd7. Now knight d2, which seems to have the idea of knight f1 to e3, and maybe again locking down firmly the d5 square. But if you look at this, quite often I believe a4 is played here just to lock down b5. It seems with this move that white is allowing b5, which is sort of exactly what black wants. With b5 and later b4, there's pressure down the c file, and e4 could be vulnerable later. We see now black just playing b5, knight f1, and now actually a teasing move, bishop g4, to try and provoke the f-pawn to move, which weakens, of course, this diagonal. Now if white plays queen d2, it's awkward for this bishop. Does the bishop really want to have to fianchetto later? There is a way technically for white to wriggle out of this if the queen did move. For example, let's have a look. Knight b6, knight e3, bishop going back because it's hitting that bishop anyway. And the queen could just shift out of the way if the bishop really wanted d2 instead of having to do a fianchetto. So this position might actually be okay as well, even if white does play b3 to just mark out c4, protect c4. This might be okay. It seems a little bit awkward though if you look at that bishop. It looks a little bit awkward. So f3, just kicking the bishop. Bishop drops back, knight e3, rook c8. a3, yeah, concerned about b4 here perhaps. So a3, knight b6, but black does seem really comfortable. f4, it seems here after f4, technically, and I believe from a very dynamic analytical perspective, that the best move might actually be e takes f4. Now intuitively, a lot of you might be wondering about this because we've just swapped what was a miserable looking pawn to be by itself here, lonesome by itself. If you look at the dynamics behind this position, accepting this particular structure, I think black has sufficient counterplay basically. For example, rook e8, knight c4. Let's have a look at this continuation. That's winning b2. So let's go again here. Instead of bishop d2, let's try knight e2. More sensible. Black, as soon as the knight moves, there's d5, and if e5, we get a favourable kind of position here where this isn't so bad. It's an isolated queen's pawn for sure, but that hook on e4 is very dangerous. So this position looks very dangerous. White is worse there. Black has a small edge here. So it seems as though e takes f4 might actually be technically the best recipe here, but I think it needs to be really backed up by analysis. This is from an engine view of the position, really. Magnus actually plays rook e8, and it's as if he's prepared to accept the risk of f5, which keeps this pawn chain here intact, which keeps the bishop a prisoner for the moment. And now in this position, white played king h1, and again it seems concretely that the right recipe, the ultimate recipe, so to speak, would be instead of bishop f8, which is what Magnus played, it seems to be e takes f4 has great power here after bishop f8. It looks miserable, but it isn't. It's one of those cases again. The visual is in conflict with the practicality. If we look at this, knight e2, for example, bishop d7, you can see that the e pawn is vulnerable here, and it doesn't really matter about black's d pawn. If we look at this, again, e4 is vulnerable because black can play a very tactical move here, h5, to try and weaken the e4 pawn. So this kind of variation is just miserable for white. And if we try rook g1 instead, just kick that, g6, this position is destabilizing white, losing that center pawn. So it does seem as though, this is from a really technical point of view, that e takes f4 offers black potentially great pressure on the white position. But yeah, Magnus just slid the bishop back, and he actually allows f5, so this is now all bypassed. But black can maneuver around the new structure here for sure, which he does. Queen d3, h6, b3, bishop c6, so he's still going to pile up pressure on e4. And it's funny, he can actually create a battery, the classic battery of the queen on b7. Can be something to be aimed for here. Queen c7, and that classic battery. So black is able to intensify the pressure, whilst white is the awkwardness of white's pieces mean that he's not able to really intensify pressure. They can't like create a battery like this. This is a luxury, it seems, of the black position with that target. That is a pawn which is kind of backward as well, a target on the diagonal. So that is a kind of big concern here, especially black sometimes breaking out with d5 is a thematic break. So with that concern in mind, because that opens up the bishop on a3, you know, with a vengeance, white tried to clamp down perhaps on black playing a d5. He clamps down, but this is at a cost. Everything in life and in chess is often at some cost. So even though it seems comfortable that this bishop's been truly shut down for a moment, what is the cost of this? Well, it weakens the f5 pawn here. You can see that both pawns are weak. And furthermore, after knight bd7, knight d1, black could, in this position, it seems technically, wriggle the bishop out to b6 with bishop e7. Magnus didn't do this. If we look at this, black's just better here. So the bishop isn't even the prisoner. And these pawns are quite nice. There's still pressure on d5. But we see actually in this position a more sort of gambling type move. But I believe Naiditsch was in time pressure. So this is a more introducing tactical complications. Topolov once said, you know, there's no such thing as the best move. The best move fits in to the context of what you're playing, you know, the time limits with the opponent. It fits in this bigger context. That's how in human chess we judge the effectiveness of the move, if you can factor a lot of things in context. So here, this is a slight risk, e4. Magnus was, I think, upset himself with this move because it sort of made it much more tactical now. But it's really very dangerous for white now, this position. If white took here, it'd be immediately exterminated with knight c5, forking queen and bishop, which is winning a piece in broad daylight. So the queen moves. Now knight e5, and it's got a hook on f3 now. Now perhaps, if white wants to stay in the game, knight c3 should be played. For example, knight f3, this position, apparently white, even though under great pressure on f5 and d5, white can apparently be technically equal here. It looks as though it's equal. But in the game, white played knight f2. And this makes actually knight f3 stronger. Now, this is actually a really good move. After bishop takes, because I'm forking queen and rook anyway, bishop takes, that is a weak pawn, but look what's happened. d5 is weaker, so that's protected. Black takes, and now it's got a target. It's fragmented. White's pawn's got a target on a3. This pawn's dangerous at the moment. We see rook e5 hitting f5 as well, and the bishop wants to be liberated if white ever took. We have rook e3, and that's taken. And now queen b2 hitting that poor little a pawn, putting white under pressure. I know the queen's protecting a3 at the moment here, but this next move interrupts that protection of a3. What is black doing? Well, black's got a lot of unpleasant ideas here, like, for example, rook e8, because the queen's also hitting d2. So the queen's kind of overloaded after rook e8, almost. So we see this knight d3 just jettisoning the a3 pawn in exchange for the f3 pawn. Now queen a2 hitting the d2 bishop, and also the c4. It's a double attack, nasty kind of double attack. So now, after bishop c3, it looks as though one would be scared about the doubling of pawns. But Magnus doesn't care. He just takes that, allows his pawns to be potentially doubled. Not immediately. White actually inserts rook a1 hitting the queen, and now white doubles. Is this a big deal here? So it looks, look at this pawn structure. It looks miserable, right? But look at black's pieces. They more than make up for it. So king g2. So even though we're faced with, in life generally, with you know, costs for everything we do, the one trick we do have up our sleeves is to make sure that the upsides compensate. Here the upsides do seem to compensate for the cost to black's pawn structure, which looks extremely severe. And also the bishop doesn't seem entirely happy at the moment. But look at this. This is massive compensation, this gigantic pin and win, as they say. And it's difficult for white already. If he wants to immediately get out of the pin, he actually played rook d1. But if he wants to get out of the pin here, this position, if he throws in the check, it's miserable because look, actually d5 is dropping off now. That was a weakness of moving the queen away from d5. d5 drops off. Black has just a big advantage there. So white just put up with the pin here with rook d1. We have h5, a wonderful move actually, because it actually stops white playing this check now to unpin with then knight f4. So yeah, this is just torture. This after h5, it's reinforcing this pin, keeping white in place on the pin. If we just rewind for a moment. Yeah, I think there's a problem in general, yeah, with d5. Okay, so let's go here. h5. It also means this bishop is not so miserable if it has this lovely diagonal. And actually, after king h3, it uses that diagonal. Rook e1, just immediately giving a piece. But look at white's position here. It's in a state of paralysis. If you look at this position, if queen e4, then the rook drops off. No, it's sadistic. If queen e2, then the pawn drops off. And this check is a bit futile. This position, the other pawn would drop off, and then it's just a disaster. Bishop can come in for the kill. So it seems as though there's nothing really for white to do here. And let's just briefly look at some other possibilities, just to highlight this. Sorry, this position. So queen e4, queen e2, rook d2. We just take that. Yeah, that's not a move even. King g2. This is the fascinating one. Black, if white's not doing anything, black's got a winning trump card here. Forget about the horrible looking pawn structure. If we look at this scenario, king g7, black just marches the pawn, starts marching the pawn. If white gets fed up with that because he sees his doom with a2, a1, winning the knight by force, and does something, then yeah, d5 will drop, and then that's it. Both of those pawns are going to drop. So the a pawn just overloads white there. So it looks as though this is just torture, pure torture of the pin and win. So white just lets, in this position, white lets the piece go by playing rook e1. We have now that piece taken. Queen takes h5 with a big threat of rook e8 check, but that's parried and keeps black a piece up because it's hitting the rook. There's no time for that take because it's losing the rook. So this is tactically just winning a piece. The game ended here. If we looked, if white was in a bullet game, bishop g7, maybe check, queen h6, and white would be with the big edge there. But that's not going to happen. You know, this is just cruelly just crushed tactically with rook e3 at the end. And if, say, white played on with rook f1, bishop g5, say, the queen's coming off, bishops up, what does white do there? So yeah, what does white do? It's horrible. Also, let's have a look here at queen takes h6. Just take there. Takes. Here, queen f3 is sufficient. The checks are just going to run out in this position after rook e8. Queen here. Say check. Rook e4. Check. And white's king has had it. The queens are going to come off. So yeah, let's go back to where the game ended. So a bit of philosophy about this. Basically, in life and in chess, we pay for things, the cost. Sometimes visually, the cost isn't such a big deal on the chessboard. It seems the piece activity of the pieces, the upsides, is what we strive for. And it seems black, even the great Magnus Carlsen, who's our top-rated human player, it seems technically, and analysts are agreeing that, and Magnus Carlsen I think is agreeing that he could have played e takes f4, which seemed to give an even greater ugliness to the d6 pawn. But even those variations were favourable for black. So yeah, I think we've got to factor in sometimes how bad looking our pawn structures are, but the resulting concrete piece activity and pressure we can put on our opponent. And in this magnificent game example, it seems that mighty pin more than compensated for any of the costs that black incurred. Hope you got something from that. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. And subscriptions, of course. Thanks very much. Cheers.